Welcome, welcome. Thank you all for being here. We're going to give folks about a minute, maybe 90 seconds or so to get joined in. I already see some, happy Wednesday. I see some comments already. If you want to tell us where you are watching from, that's always nice to see. How many people we have joining from around the United States, around North America, and around the world. So if you drop that in chat, we have a really important conversation. San Diego, Vancouver, welcome. Denver, Los Angeles. It's quite early for you. Italy, thank you, welcome. Harrisonburg, Virginia. Welcome, welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. All over. Give about 20 or so more seconds for folks to join for this really important and timely conversation on environment and restorative justice. As the conversation is going, and I'll give you a couple more reminders of this, be thinking of questions for our panelists. They're very excited to have this conversation together and with you all. Chicago, welcome. Great. Wonderful. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you. Continue to introduce yourselves in the chat so folks can connect. But thank you again for joining us for our second Zaire Institute webinar of the month, our second to last as well, for environment and restorative justice, where we have the authors of a new little book. Some of you may be familiar with the little book on restorative justice series. We have environment and restorative justice. And our panelists come from all over Brazil. We have here in North America to talk about the intersections of environmental justice and restorative justice. So how our conversation will go, I will just do some brief introduction. I'll allow the panelists to introduce themselves. There will be a conversation and presentation by our panelists, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. So I'll come back and ask some questions, but hopefully you all have some burning questions that you want our authors to answer as well. Then after the conversation, if you'll stay with me just a little bit, I have a few announcements, and then we will go on our way. Okay, so again, we will be joined by Dr. Salm, Dr. Valandra, Dr. Neto, and Dr. Pamplona, as well as a translator. And again, I'm going to give each panelist an opportunity to introduce themselves. Dr. Salm, if you want to kick us off, and then pass it on. Thank you again so much for being here for this conversation.
Good morning, everyone. I'm João Salm, a criminal justice professor at Governor State University, and one of the co-authors of this book. Thank you for being here. Edward?
Hi, everybody. Good morning. My name is Dr. Valandra. I'm one of the co-authors of the book, and I hail from my homelands, the Ocheti Shakoi Oyate Makoche. And so I'll pass it on to my dear friend, Nirsan. Nirsan, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Edward and João. I am Nirsan. I'm from Belém, the city in which is happening now, at this moment, the COP30, the United Nations Conference on Climate Change. I am professor at the Federal University of Pará and the Federal University of Western Pará, and one of the co-authors of the little book of Environment and Restorative Justice. I pass the talking piece to Josineide.
Thank you, Nilson. I don't English speaker. I need a translator. Thaís. Eu sou Josineide Pamplona.
I am Josineide Pamplona.
Eu falo de Belém do Pará.
I'm talking from Belém of Pará, in Brazil.
Esta terra se chamou Mairi, porque originalmente foi um território do povo Tupinambá.
This land was originally called Mairi because it is a indigenous people land, indigenous people Tupinambá.
Eu sou uma mulher branca, de óculos, cabelos escuros, ligeiramente ondulados e grisalhos. Estou vestindo uma blusa verde clara.
I am a white lady. I'm wearing glasses. I have some long brown hair and I'm wearing a green t-shirt.
Eu passo a palavra para o João.
Des Moines,
Yes.
Des Moines, would you like us to carry on?
Yes, please. Take it over.
Okay. All right. Well, hello, everyone, again. I'm João Salm. I'm one of the co-authors of the book. And I would like to thank, on behalf of my co-authors and myself, the Zare Institute, Howard Zare, Vernon Yahtzee, Jane Dockery, and Des Moines Wesley from Eastern Mennonite University, and our friends and colleagues from Governor State University in the Chicago Southland for providing us the support and opportunity to write and launch this book. We would also like to thank Barbara Towles for her editing, patience, and support for our writings. A little bit about me, if I may. I grew up on an island called Florianopolis, 42 paradise-like beaches. So my connection and relationship with nature have always had a profound meaning in my life. And although the island of Florianopolis is almost the same distance from the Amazon than some cities in North America, where I currently live, it was the stories and the struggles of the rubber tappers, their sustainable living, that inspired me at a very early age of my life in strengthening my relationships with nature. Chico Mendes became my hero at a very early age. His empates, these nonviolent tactics involving rubber tappers and other forest dwellers who peacefully confronted loggers, convincing them to stop their work and tearing down the forest for cattle raising, that truly touched my heart, and inspired me. Fast forward to March 2018, 27 years later, I briefly met Nilson and Josineide when Susan Sharp and I were in my hometown, the island of Florianopolis, for a talk on restorative justice. A year later, I was invited by the great Baiano Conselheiro Voltécio from the Brazilian National Council to be the guest note speaker of the Brazilian Restorative Justice Week in Salvador, Bahia, Brazil. Back then, I was inspired by the readings of many, but especially a piece called Speaking Earth, Environmental Restoration and Restorative Justice, in the book Restorative Justice Today, edited by Lauren Walker and Catherine Wormer, and some of the Canadian Barry Stewart and his teachings on the use of collaborate forms of justice to address environmental harm, respecting differences and the sacred relationships between some groups of people, First Nations and their land, and other elements of nature. My intention was to give a talk that shifted the focus of the mere use of restorative practices in Brazil from the criminal justice system to encompassing environmental justice, and perhaps create a dialogue between the global north and south on the impact of restorative justice on environmental conflicts. So I asked Nilson to read and edit my presentation. And he so graciously accepted, and he ended up writing a lot of it, as he usually does, because I'm a terrible writer. But that is when I learned how much restorative justice and its principles and practices were already being utilized to address environmental harm to the Amazon biome. I knew that Nilson and Josineide had a lot to teach me and the world about the incredible work they were doing in the Amazon. Important to say how much the restorative justice world consumes, focuses, and cites so much of the literature coming from the global north, with very little mention from the folks that produce good stuff in the global south. In 2021, Nilson, Josineide, and I wrote and published that presentation under the title Restorative Justice, a Substantive Intergenerational Ecological Approach in the Amazon region of Brazil. We reported a case in which restorative justice references were used to address a conflict involving chestnuts gatherers and family farmers in the Brazilian Amazon. The article reflects on the conditions of applying restorative justice concepts and procedures to treat socio-environmental conflicts. But I also thought at the time that Brazil did not only have stories to tell and contributions to give on how restorative justice in practical terms can address environmental harm, like in the exceptional work being developed in partnership with indigenous leaders, environmental protection agencies, government, and the courts in the Amazon, but also in other places in Brazil, like the Pantanal, another biome, home of the largest wetland in the world. The work of Professor and federal judge Raquel Domingues do Amaral also needed to be shared with the global north in addressing environmental harm. However, in my view, I also wanted and needed that this practical aspect of restorative justice from the global south accompanied a unique perspective on what it meant to restore justice in that part of the world. I told Nilson that we needed to bring the teachings and the theory of Brazilian sociologist Alberto Guerreiro Ramos, an Afro-descent scholar whose seminal work would allow us to understand the need to see restorative justice no longer through a one-dimensional, but a multi-dimensional lens. It would grant us the opportunity to pursue the good living, the bem viver, the bon viver, where nature is at the center of what it means to live a just life. That is when Nilson suggested another Global South name, Alberto Acosta, and his idea of buen viver, and how we have the opportunity through those lenses to reimagine another world. But what would that entail? It would mean that we would need to see and conceive restorative justice as a movement that allows us to live the good and convivial life, not only through the economic dimension of life, where we produce goods and services, but also a life that allows us to live and experience our political, social, spiritual, psychological, emotional, and ecological dimensions of life. And as the great Canadian professor Elizabeth Elliot in her book Security with Care suggests, guided through the ethics of care. It would also mean that our community needs to urgently prioritize the discussions in the role of restorative justice principles and practices as a powerful tool to limit, constraint the power of the market over our lives and the subtler instrumental reasoning that has taken over restorative justice. It entails that at the heart of our debate over restorative justice, we should first and foremost ask, who is this human being involved in restorative justice? Is he a being of the market merely, a detached being, an alienated being, a one-dimensional being, or a complexity, a multidimensional being? And this book is the product of a dialogue between important representatives of the global north, south, and an in-betweener like myself around those issues. We wanted to invite the reader to reflect and think with us, and among other things, how environmental issues reflect our complexities, our multidimensionalities beyond market reductionism, regulations, and settler colonial harm. That was the moment when Nilsson said, we had just the right person to join us in writing this book, Edward Valandra, to give a global North perspective on restorative justice, environmental harm, and one-dimensional and multidimensional perspectives on undoing settler harm. And let me tell you, was Nilsson right? He was the perfect person for that. And to speak more on that, I pass the mic over to my brother Edward Valandra, whom I've learned so much from in these past years. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, brother. That was quite a narrative, which is needed in today. And when when Dr. Sam talks about the multidimensionality, I thought that was critical to the discussion to amplify the voices that don't get heard a lot. And so, I was invited to this project after the Chicago National Association of Community and Restorative Justice, NACRJ. And so I got an email, I think it was from Nilsson, asking if I would be a co-author. And it was the first time I ever co-authored a book. And the challenge, of course, was that we all speak different languages. There's Portuguese, English, and Lakota, and the global north, the global south. Now, as far as the global north is concerned, the settler narrative has really is the narrative in almost any facet of life. So when my brother, Dr. Sam, was talking about the one dimensionality, it's very clear in the global north that that is true. All approaches have a cost benefit analysis, and it's something that my people understand, or all indigenous peoples understand, but it's not the only analysis. There are other factors to consider. So when I was invited, there was the challenge to somehow amplify the very things that are in the book. And so, I had made 2 trips to Brazil and had met indigenous peoples and people who who are involved with restorative justice but want to break out of the criminal justice framework that RJ is often used for. And that is often a challenge. And so one of the challenges of that is, of course, settler colonialism. And as an indigenous person, I find it somewhat of a paradox, well, not even somewhat, but a paradox, where how do you decolonize justice in a settler world? That is a huge challenge. And that was one we as co-authors, whether we admitted it or not, that was one of our challenges, is how to decolonize justice in a settler world. Because in settler societies, you have this movement called restorative justice, and then you have this thing called settler colonialism. And they exist. And it's for me, it's confounding that you have restorative justice in a settler society or settler world, but they do intersect, not only through restorative justice and restorative environmental justice and restorative justice, but when they do intersect in a settler society, that's when the issues of harms start to arise. And settler colonialism, when you look at it realistically, settler colonialism has done much harm, not only to indigenous peoples, but to the environment. And that's where these intersections happen. This is where that multidimensionality begins to emerge, and we can talk about these things. So maybe as a very brief example, I know among my people, the Ochechi Shakon Yoyate, often we're called Lakota, Dakota, or Nakota. We had the Dakota Access Pipeline coming through our ceremonies, and through our territories. And one of the things that differentiates us from the settlers is that it was all economic, as Dr. Salm was talking about. And there was other dimensions that were not mentioned. So probably the clearest example I can give of that is when we talk about water. I know in the West, especially out in my area, often we talk about water, or water is often talked about in terms of quantity, acre feet. And a lot of times our discussions around water with the settlers is quantifying water. So that tells us it's a resource as far as the settlers are concerned. And they describe that, or they define it in the acre foot, like an acre of land a foot deep. And so what happens is you get involved with the discussions of water rights. Water rights. How much water? Who's entitled? Who gets it? And they got all these legal terms. But when my people step in, we say, well, we want to talk about the rights of the water. The water has inherent rights as well. And it's not a commodity. And it has personhood, it has agency. And we are defending the water nation, the water people, against this development. And I think that separates us from the West, how they think, the worldview, especially in settler societies. So that one example, I think, really gives a powerful dichotomy of the West and indigenous peoples, but also when you have restorative justice and settler colonialism, when they intersect, then we have to talk about undoing the settler harms. And that is a very difficult thing to do in settler societies, because most settlers are not raised with the perspective that indigenous peoples have. And so, so that's the challenge that we face today, is to contest the settler narrative and to begin to think about other ways of being in relation. And before I maybe the passing it on to my brother Nirsan, I would say that I think the most critical thing that we have to give to settler societies is this notion of doing no harm, or as it's been expressed, in other words, to be a good relative, or the good life, as it mentions it in the book. And so I think Nirsan and Josie will have something to say about some specific things about that, and then be able to give more ideas about what the book is trying to say about being a good relative or living a good life within the natural world, what that takes, and why it's important, and why it's so crucial today. So, Nirsan, Josie?
Thank you, Edward. Your words are always very inspiring for me, and certainly for Josie and for everyone who listened to you. And I am saying this because when you entered in the book project, I and João and Josie was writing, our idea was to write about uh, the the challenge to apply restorative justice to heal uh, environmental harms and injustice. But when we contacted with you, brother, our perspective changed. Uh, changed because we understand when we understood more. Of course, we already knew, but we understood more, more clearly. Uh, you clarified our perspective about the relation, the link between the environmental harm and injustice and settler colonialism in the Americas, or in Turtle Island, or in Abya, North and South. Uh, these two names, Turtle Island and Abya, are indigenous names of the Americas, of what the colonizers, the settlers, call Americas. So when we contacted with you and your perspective, we contacted to with a broad indigenous perspective on restorative justice. Uh, and we understood that to heal the harms related to the environment, we need to heal settler harms, uh, the harms and injustice caused by the unlawful, and we see this kind of situation. We see this kind of situation not only in Abya North, Turtle Island, or North America. We see this in South America too, and in other places throughout the world, in Africa, in the South Pacific, in New Zealand, Australia, and many other places. So the book, since you entered in the process of writing, changed the perspective in order to understand that to discuss an environmental restorative justice, we need to discuss at the same time settler colonialism. So, and one of the most difficult challenges we have is how to heal settler harms and how to make, as you wrote, how to make strangers relatives. How to make strangers relatives, because settlers and indigenous peoples are strangers to each other. Mm. And it's the first step. The first step is to open our life to this kind of reconciliation, and if not reconciliation, at least this kind of meeting, this kind of dialogue, in order to care, in order to care the earth, in order to care our relatives from the natural world. So I'm very grateful for this change in my perspective, because I was dealing with environmental harm and injustice in another way, more pragmatic way, and I think the book now is offering to the world a broad perspective, a multidimensional perspective, as João say, to heal settler harms, and in consequence heal the secondary harm, the environmental harm and injustice. So thank you, João, for inviting me to participate in this project, and thank you, Edward, for the contributions you gave to this project, that now is offered to the world. And with these words, I pass the talking piece to Josie. Josie is my wife too. It's not just a co-author, but my wife too. And Josie has a lot of practical experience with restorative justice, and especially some experience related to how to deal with complex cases which need complex interventions. So, Josie, the word is with you now.
Thank you, Nilson. Depois dessa apresentação que vocês fizeram, eu fico até sem palavras para dar continuidade. Antes de tudo, eu gostaria de dizer da alegria de estar novamente no Instituto Zé para participar desse webinar como coautora do Little Book sobre meio ambiente e justiça restaurativa.
I'm really happy to be here today as an author of this little book. And she also was thanking Professor Nilson, Professor João Salme, and Professor Eduardo Balandra.
Tive a grata oportunidade de estar no Instituto Zé em 2017 e em 2019, com um grupo de brasileiros, e essas duas imersões foram divisores de água na nossa vida como praticantes de justiça restaurativa no Brasil.
I had the opportunity to be in their institute in 2019, 2019,
17.
2017 and 2019. So we had this opportunity to see their institute.
E João, Edward, Nilson já contaram um pouco como nós nos encontramos para esse projeto.
They have already talked about how we have met each other to start this project.
O Nilson já disse que nós somos parceiros já de 20 anos.
Nilson has already said that we are partners over the last 20 years.
Mas antes desse projeto não tínhamos tanta proximidade com o João, nem tampouco com o Edward. E uma curiosidade é que no primeiro Zoom, para falarmos sobre o projeto,
but before this project, we didn't know Professor João Salme and Professor Eduardo Valandra. And I have a curiosity to tell you.
Depois que o Edward falou bastante sobre a perspectiva dele, ele era o mais novo a entrar no grupo, eu disse no final do nosso Zoom, não compreendi tudo, mas eu posso sentir a energia das suas palavras.
After Professor Valandra talked to us the first time in Zoom, he explained everything he was saying. And at the end, I told him, I cannot understand everything you say, but I can feel it.
De fato, eu sentia como se nós já fôssemos conhecidos. E a primeira contribuição que o Edward nos enviou para este projeto é o capítulo que se chama Tornando Estranhos Parentes. Eu percebi desde aquele primeiro Zoom que ele vivenciava esse princípio.
In fact, I didn't understand everything what he was saying, but I really understand he's in practice of what he's explaining. The first contribution of Professor Valandra to our book was this chapter of being relatives.
Antes de nos encontrarmos para esse projeto, eu, como juíza da Corte Estadual no Brasil, atuei em projetos e um programa de justiça restaurativa voltado para crianças e adolescentes numa cidade chamada Santarém, no coração da Amazônia.
Before we start this project, I have already worked as a judge in Brazil in a restorative justice project with children in a city called Santarém.
Embora os casos que chegassem a este programa de justiça restaurativa envolvessem crianças e adolescentes vitimizados por violências diretas ou como pessoas que indivíduos que praticavam violência, por estar no coração da Amazônia, nós começamos a perceber que os conflitos que traziam num primeiro plano, uma violência direta entre as pessoas, estavam dentro de um contexto maior que revelava para nós aspectos de conflitos socioambientais.
In this project of restorative justice, which she was saying, they used to receive children as victims and as offenders. But during the time they were receiving those cases, they realized that there was not only personal relationships involved in the situations and the problems and the conflicts, but there was a lot of different dimensions of the conflicts. Professor João Salme was telling me to tell you Santarém, the city where Professor Josineide was a judge in the past, is in Santarém, which is in the heart of the Amazon in Brazil, exactly in the middle of the South America.
Yeah. Então, observar esses casos e esse nível, esses aspectos socioambientais que esses casos traziam, me trouxe uma curiosidade acadêmica. E eu passei a refletir sobre isso com o meu parceiro Nilson, que é um antropólogo, e essa curiosidade me levou a fazer um doutorado interdisciplinar em ciências ambientais na Universidade Federal do Oeste do Pará, na mesma cidade onde eu atuava.
When I was receiving those cases and looking at those social and environmental aspects of the conflicts, it made me very curious about those things, which led me to discuss those things with my husband, which is Professor Nilson. And then I started, I don't know how to say, could you help me, Professor Nilson, doutorado?
PhD.
PhD, okay. Which led me to make a PhD at a federal university in Santarém, which is the same city I was working as a judge.
Então, reunir num pequeno livro diferentes perspectivas escritas a 8 mãos foi um grande desafio para nós.
To put all those ideas in a little book written by 8 hands was a really great challenge for all of us.
Mas também foi uma grande alegria e foi um grande aprendizado. Foi como se colocar todas as nossas concepções de justiça restaurativa em prática.
But I'm also really glad, and I have learned a lot of things. It was like applying restorative justice to our lives.
E isso foi possível porque, de fato, nós passamos a compartilhar compreensões acerca do universo que nós abordávamos. A abordagem multidimensional que contempla aspectos mais amplos na visão de um conflito, que o João Salme tinha e agregou ao projeto, foi um ponto de partida.
And all of that was possible because we came to understand the things together and to see the multidimensional approach that every one of us had already.
As ideias sobre os danos causados pelo colonialismo, que eu e Nilson já tínhamos suscitado, foram muito clarificadas, como o Nilson já disse, com as contribuições do Edward, especialmente quando ele trouxe a contribuição sobre o primeiro dano, o roubo das terras indígenas.
All those ideas were clarified with our meeting, especially with Professor Valandra, who has explained to us about the settled harms and especially the concept of first harm. I'm sorry, I'm not a professional.
The process of stolen indigenous lands.
The process of stolen indigenous lands.
Isso foi algo novo para nós, mas que fez total sentido.
This idea was new to us, but it makes a lot of sense.
E eu posso ilustrar isso com um dos casos que nós trouxemos no livro, que também é um caso que eu tive a oportunidade de acompanhar como juíza da Comissão de Soluções Fundiárias no Brasil, o caso dos Guarani Kaiowá, no Mato Grosso do Sul.
To exemplify this, what I'm saying, I'd like to talk to you about the Guarani Kaiowá case, which is described in the little book.
O povo Guarani Kaiowá é um povo que sofreu remoção das suas terras na base da violência, isso para levar a efeito um projeto de governo, de desenvolvimento e de agronegócio.
The Guarani Kaiowá people were forced removal from their lands by a governmental project of development.
Esse pode ser considerado o primeiro dano. Esse povo foi removido forçadamente de suas terras sob a pretensão de uma legítima política de governo.
This can be considered the first harm because these people were removed from their lands as a government project.
Esse povo indígena, deslocado do seu território, mas ainda vivendo ao seu modo tradicional, cresceu e um século depois, sentindo-se vulnerabilizado em razão das condições precárias de subsistência em que viviam no Mato Grosso do Sul, confinados em terras que foram destinadas para sua moradia após a remoção, decidiu fazer a retomada do seu território ancestral.
Just a minute. Just a second. I'm right. These indigenous people, after they were displaced from their territory, they keep living in their traditional way of living, right? And after 100 years of this event took place, they start to reclaim their lands back.
Então, essas retomadas são uma demonstração do conflito que é gerado sob pretensões legítimas. De um lado, fazendeiros, proprietários das terras, de outro, indígenas que se dizem também legítimos possuidores à existência naquele território de retomada.
Those projects of reclaiming lands, reclaiming original indigenous lands, they start a lot of different conflicts with the people the settlers who said they were the landowners and the indigenous peoples.
A abordagem da justiça tradicional para esse caso é muito limitada, porque contempla só o aspecto jurídico e o aspecto econômico.
The traditional approach of our judiciary system to this kind of conflict is not enough to understand all its complexity because it only looks to economic and law subjects.
Neste livro, nós demonstramos como a abordagem da justiça restaurativa sobre uma perspectiva multidimensional insere para a construção de soluções para esse caso perspectivas psicológica, social, política, econômica, cultural, ecológica e espiritual.
And the restorative justice approach to this kind of conflict show us another possibilities in the multidimensional way of seeing it, which help us to see the same conflict using social, economic, psychological, spirituality. I'm not sure.
Ecológica, política.
Politicals.
Então, eu não quero me prolongar para dar oportunidade para os meus colegas falarem um pouquinho mais. Então, eu quero apenas deixar o convite para que todos possam se debruçar no livro e aproveitar a leitura. Para nós foi uma grata satisfação participar desse projeto. Tenho certeza que aquilo que ele trouxe de contribuições para a nossa experiência pessoal também trará para a experiência de cada praticante da justiça restaurativa. Especialmente no tempo em que vivemos, em que a emergência climática nos faz olhar para as necessidades de cuidar do nosso planeta.
I will allow my colleagues to speak, but I would like to invite you all to read our book and to tell you it was a great pleasure to be a part of this project.
Thank you so much, Edward, João, Nilson. É com vocês.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much for giving us a bit of the context of the book, some of the history that brought you all together, and that really interesting case that you shared, Josie. So as we're waiting for folks, as Josie said, please do add your questions to wherever you're watching from. If you're watching from Facebook or YouTube or from StreamYard, if you just type into the comments your question, we'll see them on our end. But I have a question. I'm thinking a lot about Nilson and Josie, what you shared around this idea of complex problems that need complex interventions. And so I have a question that may be a bit complex for us to think about, but I'm wondering if we can just sort of spitball around it. So Nilson, as you mentioned, right now in Belém, in Brazil, COP30, the UN Conference on Climate Change, is happening. And a notable absence from that conference is that of the United States, which is, of course, arguably one of the greatest contributors to climate change to the climate catastrophe. And so I'm sort of thinking, or my question is, do any of you sort of have a vision of how restorative justice can play a role in thinking about more protracted harm or large-scale harm, even perhaps between states? Again, a lot of harm is coming from states in the so-called global north and is impacting those in the so-called global south. And so what role might restorative justice have in attending to some of those harms, those larger scale and protracted harms? Yeah, just curious if there's any thoughts there.
Oh, hard question. I think the way, the path we can go, the compass, the direction we can follow, is to rebuild, to restore our relationship with our relatives from the natural world. We need to restore our relations to Earth. And it's why we are talking about good living, bem viver, buen vivir, or being good relatives in a Lakota way. Because if we don't discuss the way we are having our relationship with other than human beings, if you don't discuss the relationship with the earth, if you discuss the environmental problematic only as a problematic related to natural resources we can use, we can manage, and other thing like that, as nature were just a thing we can use, not a person we can respect and and act with, not to, but with. If we don't change our anthropocentric perspective, probably we will not have much chances to change this crisis we are living in. So climate change will continue. If the problematic continue to be only based on economic discussions, like and we can in which we can make harms and after compensate economically, financially, maybe harm will continue. So we need to restore, as we say in the book, restore our kinship with our natural world relatives. But I don't know if Edward can clarify more this idea of to be relatives with the natural world, based on Lakota perspective.
I think Dr. Sam, do you have anything to say on that?
Edward, I think you are muted.
Can you hear me?
You're not listening to you?
We can hear you.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I was wondering if Dr. Sam might have something to say about that too.
Thanks, Edward. I know the question was directed toward for Nilsson and Josie and redirected to you, but yeah, I do have a thought on that. I believe that our restorative justice movement in the world today is a strong, solid platform for rethinking justice. And I believe that, when we use restorative justice in schools, in courts, in prisons, wherever we're doing this, that our relationship with the natural environment needs to be included. I can not only talk about and write about restorative justice in education, for example, and not include that relationship with nature, and talk about that with kids and make them aware that it's vital to acknowledge and recognize that relationship that Nilsson was talking about and Edward is talking about and Josie were talking about. I think that we need to recalibrate our understanding and our the RJ movement in the world. Our natural world needs to be put in the forefront of the movement, as opposed to some random people talking about it and not making it the central piece of our movement. That's where I think restorative justice can become more have a bigger impact in our lives. Start from the very early ages. We've been using and implementing restorative justice in every organizational setting. Why not use that platform to put nature in the forefront of that movement? If that makes sense. Sorry, Edward. I think I took too long on that answer.
Actually, these are the kind of discussions we had when we wrote the book, when we co-authored, and there were some very challenging perspectives put forward. But I would say this, with modernity, the benefits that the West the Western perspective says about modernity, all the benefits and progress of modernity has shown us to this day that there's more cost to modernity than there is any benefits. And so I would say restorative justice may have a way of opening that dialogue as to even questioning the world. I'm not questioning the world, but questioning Western perspectives about the nature of reality itself. So when I think about the West and settler systems like the US, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, even Israel, and these other settler societies, it's you have to look at the systemic nature of those societies and the institutions. So as an indigenous person, I look at, let's say, the legal institutions. They center on the notion of justice. And part of the underlying notion of justice is neutrality. We can't have neutrality in this day and age. You just can't. Or objectivity, you just can't have that. And then you have the political institutions, which is all about power. And if you've been following the US, that's all they're using now is power, raw power to make a point. But that's the political institutions. They use power. The legal institutions use justice. So with power, you have a universalism. Everyone's equal. Everyone's the same. There's no equity. But when you look at restorative justice, that is about relationships. It's about relationships. And the thing that I find encouraging about that perspective of restorative justice as applied to the environment is a sense of morality and accountability. And those two things cannot be found in the legal and political institutions of any settler society. So you have to rely on the masses, the people, to begin to have those discussions about moving forward. Because as my brother Nielsen was talking about, this is COP30. COP30. This should have been, all these issues about the environment should have been solved at COP1. But we see the disparities. The UN as an institution, legal and political. And then you have the indigenous peoples and the settler allies of indigenous peoples left out of that. So we have to, as Dr. Song was saying, rethink, recalibrate, reframe what the heck we're doing in this world today. Because I guarantee you, 500 years from now, there will not be a world if this continues. So it's a restatement of the nature of reality that we live in. And there is a reality, as my brothers and sisters were talking about, good living, good relatives, doing no harm. It's there. But it's ours to lose if we don't begin to have these kind of discussions. And they're difficult discussions. In my homelands, the US settlers had offered us millions of dollars for the land they stole from us. Millions. And we say no. No. It sits in the US Treasury at $1 billion, and we say no. We want the return of our land, the return of our relative. That's what we want. And that causes a lot of conflict among US settlers because they're afraid. Having to return land that they stole is such a hurdle for them to get over. But that's the reality of the indigenous voice that needs to be amplified and is amplified in the little book. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. Josie, do you have something to share?
Ok. Pouco mais depois disso, né? Isso tudo. Mas no nosso livro, a gente fala do settler ambientalismo. A perspectiva do ambientalismo dos colonos da civilização.
In our book, to add something after all of these were said, in our book we talk about the settler colonialism and the settler relation with the environment.
E é reconhecidamente plausível a existência de ondas de ambientalismo que tentam dar uma resposta para a questão da crise climática.
And as we can see, there's a lot of waves in ambientalism in our settled society, which tries to heal the harms, the environmental harms.
As unidades de conservação ambiental, que é um modelo que existe nos Estados Unidos, também existe no Brasil, a existência de territórios coletivos, o socioambientalismo.
As examples, we can say about the environmental conservation units, which we have in Brazil and in the USA. And we can talk about the collective lands, territories.
São movimentos válidos, mas será que são suficientes?
Those are valid movements, but I'm not sure if they are enough.
O que a gente percebeu ao construir a ideia do livro, a partir das contribuições do Edward e daquilo que nós podemos extrair do movimento dos povos indígenas no Brasil,
what we have noticed when we were writing the book and what we have learned with Professor Valandra and our different indigenous peoples movements in Brazil,
é que é preciso incluir a perspectiva indígena. E ela é radical, como o Edward colocou aqui.
What we have learned is we need to include the indigenous perspective, and the indigenous perspective is radical, just as it should.
O desafio da justiça restaurativa, o desafio para aqueles que buscam construir a paz é conciliar essas diferentes perspectivas.
The challenge to restorative justice and the challenge to those who try to
building peace.
Community.
Building peace.
Building
Try
peace.
to building peace.
And the challenge to those people who try to building peace is to include those perspectives.
Como fazer? Não sabemos. Mas no livro a gente tem um vislumbre quando a gente fecha e conclui com uma metáfora da águia e do condor.
How we can do that, we don't know, but in the book we have some ideas, some glimpses in a lot of
the closing chapter.
In the closing chapter.
In the closing chapter, when we talk about the metaphor about the eagle and the condor.
Okay. Yeah.
The joint flight with the eagle and the condor.
Thank you. Yeah, what I'm hearing sort of as a through line in all of your sharing, perhaps tacitly, is that like a lot of the work exists in solidarity. Dr. Valandra, you mentioned between Indigenous people and settler allies in promoting this work, but also solidarity between those of us in, again, the so-called global north that is sort of the primary driver of climate catastrophe, and solidarity with those in the so-called global south that are sort of taking on the undue brunt of that climate catastrophe. And so I'm not hearing a lot of optimism in terms of the ability of current systems and institutions to necessarily drive that work forward, but in the smaller ways that we can have solidarity with one another, there may be some movement there. Does that feel about right? Yeah, seeing nodding heads. Yeah, so I have a couple of questions in the chat, and again, we still have some time, so feel free to join the conversation there. We have a comment from Dr. Anita Vadva in Houston, who says, how might restorative justice look like for environmental harms, or what might restorative justice look like for environmental harms in my hometown of Houston, Texas, where petrochemical companies cause cancer clusters? So can we think about restorative justice in attending to the harms of particular institutions, particular entities, companies that are driving environmental harms? Are there other examples from your context that can maybe shed a little light on this question?
Now, during COP30, we are discussing in Belém a lot about these petrochemical industries and the harms they cause. Of course, it's very difficult to think if our thoughts are very immediate. We are thinking on an immediate response. It's difficult to offer some more pragmatic response to this issue. We need to think that we are dealing with a long-term issue, a long-term problematic. We need to think that we need to an energetical transition. I don't know if is it correct in English. Energetic transition. We need to not only to restore our relationships with the earth, but think we need to change our perspective about energy. So we need to think about green energy. We need to think about electric cars and many other things. Some ways to produce energy that not impact too much the natural world, and not impact too much vulnerable communities. So we need a more sustainable perspective, but this is an issue that it's important to have a long-term response, not an immediate response. So if we think that restorative justice can offer a response only in an immediate perspective, it's difficult to believe that restorative justice will work in such case. But if we think that restorative justice is a way of imagining, a reimagined justice, more than a way of practicing justice, as a way of reimagine justice, we can reimagine our perspective of justice in a long-term way. So Restorative justice can we say this in the book, offer response to historical harms, harms came from the past, and offer perspectives to the future, if we understand that some kinds of environmental issues are multi-generational issues, and the issues related to energy are this kind of issues that need a more complex approach.
Yeah, I'm wondering if others have thoughts there, but I just wanted to offer, I really appreciate that reframing, even of how we think about restorative justice. I think oftentimes we think about restorative justice as a response to a particular and acute instance of harm, instead of thinking about it, again, as sort of long-term. So I think that reframing of even the framework or understanding of restorative justice as a way of thinking about doing justice long term, I really appreciate.
And if you don't mind, the Moite, not only long term, but through a multifocal lens, in a multidimensional way. It seems to me that that restorative justice has become very focused on certain dimensions of life, but the ecological dimension is somewhat neglected. So how can we not only look at this in terms of time and space, but also that what it means to be human, or what composes a human, right? Who is the human? And so that I feel could be added to what you just mentioned.
Sure. I might add that what restorative justice, the reimagining, we talked about rearticulating, restating things. What the restorative justice we are talking about in this discussion points to maybe the legitimacy of those systems that are in place. That's the challenge that restorative justice is taking on, whether it's framed that way or not. But this restorative justice movement intersecting with environmental justice, intersecting with settler colonialism, is conveying to these settler systems that their legitimacy is at question. And what does that look like when people begin to have, let's say, restorative justice in its multidimensional facet? What does that mean when you no longer are participating in a system that is inherently violent, inherently harmful? I would say that this is bringing up the larger question, again, as I had mentioned earlier. What is this Western perspective that so dominates the world that people are beginning to talk about it through restorative justice? I mean, restorative justice is going away from just the criminal justice system to these other kind of vistas of everyone's lives. So what does it mean then to have accountability, to have a moral compass, to say this is harmful and we should not engage in this way of life, this way of thinking? And as my sister and brothers are saying, it's the long game. It's the very long game. And so over time, I believe more people will look at restorative justice as something, as an alternative to begin to address these more complicated issues, which probably in reality are really not that complicated. It's just that the systems aren't complicated and it makes things look very undoable, when in fact, to be a good relative is probably the most basic thing that underlies all of this discussion. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. We have another question in the chat, and in a way, I almost wish I had started with this question because it feels sort of fundamental, getting at really what does restorative justice or the healing that restorative justice purports to offer? What does it look and feel like? So thinking about the experience and nature of violence in all its forms, personal, economic, ecological, and settler colonial, and the nature and dynamic of healing. Questions. What does healing look and feel like? What are the dynamics within the restorative justice process that result in healing? Is restorative justice in its purest non-economic or instrumentalist form a means by which to recapture and honor the sacred? And I think you each have spoken to that question in various ways, but I do think it's important to highlight what is it particular to restorative justice and the sort of healing that it purports to offer that can prove particularly useful or meaningful when we're thinking about environmental violence.
Who wants to start?
Go ahead, Nirsan.
You can?
No, Nirsan. Nirsan has all the answers.
Oh my God. I don't have the answers. Maybe what kind of heal? What we are healing? I think restorative justice heal relationships. Relationships broken. And indigenous perspective, indigenous way of understanding this relationality, we could say restore the broken kingship, the broken kingship, the thing that link one another and engage us in good relations, in good relationships. I think any kind of harm is about relationship broken. Any kind of harm involving humans, involving non-humans, but all harm is a kind of relationship broken. So heal for me is to restore the relationships, restore the good living, restore the conviviality, the good conviviality. And we can understand this in many ways. For example, restore the relationship with myself, restore the relationship with other people, restore the relationship with the natural world, restore the relationship with the earth, with Mother Earth, or with the grandmother Earth. So is restore relationships. When we restore this, our relationship with ourselves, with other, and with nature, we heal. We are making healing. But of course, this understanding is not complete. It's just a way, a path to healing process.
Thank you. To add maybe a layer to this question, and at the risk of inviting you all to get a little woo-woo or like utopian. Yeah, that question of like what healing will look and feel like. I wonder if like we can get imaginative and particular. If if today somehow we, all of the actors in the world, on the global stage, restorative justice practitioners, if we were able to have our way as it relates to environmental justice, what is the vision of the world that we have after, right? What is the vision of those relationships? What is the vision of day-to-day life? What is the vision of our systems? Yeah, maybe that is too big a vision, but I think it's good to sometimes lean into too big a vision. Any thoughts there? What might things look like? Yes, and I have some affirmation that we love woo-woo.
I believe the starting point for that is really that acknowledgement piece, right? Acknowledging those relationships, our relationship, our sacred relationship with nature. Just acknowledging that is a huge, huge step towards something different. I think that we in mass market driven societies are so alienated of that relationship that we don't even understand it, let alone make it meaningful in our lives. I think where we at least need to start, just by acknowledging, like, we've lost it. We've lost that sense of, how is, I live in Chicago, how is Lake Michigan a relative? How is that beautiful body of water that I throw things in, and just don't really care about in the summer? How is that a violence against a relative? How do I see Lake Michigan as a relative? Just questioning, asking that to people would be, in my view, a great start.
Have some folks muted that I think are trying to speak. Okay, there you go.
Okay. Well, I just have a few notes that I'd like to read to people about this notion of I'm going to quote a lot of the late bell hooks on this matter. So it has a lot to do with the intergenerational harms that have happened since the advent of modernity, but certainly pre-modern as well. But bell hooks, she wrote a book. The late bell hooks wrote a book. It's all called All About Love and New Visions. And she said three things that just struck me really profoundly in writing of this book as well. One, she said, love and abuse cannot coexist. Domination cannot exist where a love ethic prevails. And without justice, there can be no love. And she talked about that. And she said in her book, she talked about love being a verb, an act, motion, movement, as opposed to a noun, as a thing. So I thought here, I said, bell hooks points reflect an indigenous people's worldview of being good relatives, where once estranged individuals become a relative, meaning people committed to do no harm. That's what she's talking about. And in an interview she did with NPR, she said, people want to feel more connected. They want to feel more connected to their neighbors. They want to feel more connected to the world. And when we learn through love, we can have that connection. We can see the strangers as ourselves. So that has been kind of she is able to maybe articulate that love is the key ingredient. And people who have heard me talk before, I point to Powhatan, who in 1609 said to the settlers in North America, which applies to South America and Central America, Powhatan said to those settlers like John Smith and that gang, he said, why do you take from us by force that which you may obtain by love? And I think that question is still relevant to this day, that we can still achieve this, but love is I think an emotion that can direct and guide RJ, and then its greater implications for healing. And so I think that, you know, that's a huge ask of Western nations, Western peoples, but indigenous peoples offered that when the settlers first came over, the willing to make you relatives, to make strangers relatives, and then to do no harm and go that way. So he posed that question, and I still think that question is relevant today in the woo-woo framework of what we're talking about, because it has substance and it has meaning. So yeah.
Thank you. We're just about at time, but I want to offer Josie an opportunity to share.
Thank you, thank you. Em rápidas palavras, eu poderia acrescentar que a justiça restaurativa é uma perspectiva que nos permite imaginar e viver em relações conosco mesmo, com o outro e com o mundo natural.
I would like to add that restorative justice helps us to reimagine our relationship with others and with nature.
Que possam incluir 3 princípios básicos. Primeiro, o reconhecimento da dignidade.
I think it should include three principal ideas. The first one is, a primeira é, doutora, desculpa.
Dignidade. Não somente a dignidade humana, mas a dignidade de todos os seres, que inclui os seres não humanos.
The first idea is dignity. Not only your human dignity, but the dignity of every living being in our world and the nature. Sorry.
Yes. A segunda ideia é a de solidariedade, como o Demonte já colocou aqui.
The second idea is of solidarity,
E a terceira é a de não violência.
And the third idea is of non-violence.
É isso. É sobre isso. Muito obrigada.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you again to all of our panelists. I'm sure there is so much more conversation that we could have had, so many more great questions. But I encourage folks to purchase the book, to reach out to the authors, to tap in as you can into this important conversation. I know that there are restorative justice practitioners and environmental justice activists in the audience here who also have so much wisdom. And so I hope that we can keep this conversation moving forward. So again, thank you all for joining us. I have one last few announcements, and it's that we have one more webinar coming up in November, Becoming a Restorative Lawyer, Building a Culture of Connection Across Legal Traditions. So the author, Brenda Waugh, and restorative justice leader Howard Zehr will be joined in conversation with lawyers from around the world to talk about how restorative justice is impacting and informing how they think about the law. And then finally, if you want to learn more about the Zehr Institute, both past, present, and future, please visit our website and feel free to make a donation at that link. Here is the link to register to our next webinar. And please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or concerns. And with that, I'm wishing you all well. Thank you again for joining us. And we hope to see you next week for our next one. Take care.